#futurecraft is an emerging genre of research creation, emerging prolifically on Instagram especially, that encompasses a number of traditional material maker methodologies merged with the tools and methods of scientific technological advance. In this presentation, I will show a 4-minute digital video along with micrographs and other images to form a didactic visual narrative about the processes of mammalian tissue engineering on hand-woven protein fiber scaffolds. The process, which I developed as part of this project, Biomateria, Biotextile craft, sits at the intersection of textiles and biological science in the transdisciplinary application of traditional craft processes to biotechnological laboratory protocols. The video specifically shows the wet weaving process, followed by the seeding of live cells onto the scaffolds, and the performance with adapted tools, protocols, and the long-term growth of these hybrid new life forms, and life is in quotes, as well as the presentation and display of these processes and experimental results are unconventional outputs for both science and craft. Wet weaving is an aseptic, hands-on process invented out of life and death necessity. The tools and materials used for biotextiles tissue engineering, a method of fostering cell growth into living tissue layers onto an underlying hand-woven structure, the scaffold, must be completely sterile in order to avoid microbial contamination. And the human body, as we know, a complex holobiont of bacteria, fungi, and yeasts, along with what we consider uniquely human material, represents a threat to the health of a single biotextile in a petri dish. So this necessity for asepsis dictates the tools and methods and even the philosophical frameworks for weaving and runs counter to what we consider hands-on. Situated within the frameworks of feminist, performative, and research-based practice, this work analyzes the craft of tissue engineering as a form of haptic epistemology, that is, an embodied enactment, mimicry, and redesign through creative and scientific means of the inherent haptic intelligence of the body and its biological systems of growth, repair, and regeneration. So this paper will highlight 4 years of biotextile tissue engineering research and artistic production conducted during laboratory-based artist residencies. I think I'm about up to 6 now. So I'll discuss the resultant artworks that seek to generate an artistic and aesthetic knowledge base stemming from and centered on the shared labor of physical laboratory experiments with semi-living mammalian cells. And I say semi-living because they're only alive in a laboratory. Those were my cells, by the way, and my scaffold. On November 5th, 2015, Montreal newspaper Le Devoir published an article entitled Machines and Men. And in this article on human physical relationships with art and technology, they reviewed my exhibition, Biomateria, which was then current at the Faculty of Fine Arts Gallery in Montreal. And the author stated that visitors were invited to put on gloves and handle what could very well be human remains. The materials in question were cultured mammalian cell lines, both human and animal, which had been obtained from one of the laboratories where I worked. And the exhibition included numerous tissue engineering experiments with what I had successfully technically developed through wet weaving, cultivating mammalian tissue growth on hand-woven textile scaffolds in vitro. These hybrid forms, speculated to contain human remains, were through the choice of media phrasing spectacularized as abject objects. And for me, this called into question not only our notions of what is categorically human in different contexts, but also our negotiation of live or once living material, particularly in art contexts. These same materials are not treated as quite so abject or quite so human within regular laboratory contexts, but more so as standardized research materials of human origin. Cell lines are alphanumerically categorized in a non-referential way so as to depersonalize and thus not empathize empathize with the original person whose body was biopsied to obtain them. Biopsied materials legally no longer belong to the person they came from. They instead become non-autonomous material objects, kept live or not. Neither quite so disenfranchised nor quite so spectacular, I refer to the live microorganisms used in my work as vital materials. And I mention vitality not only in terms of their liveliness, but also in alignment with Jane Bennett's definition. The capacity of things not only to impede or block the will and designs of humans, but also to act as quasi-agents with forces with trajectories, propensities, or tendencies of their own. So I'm next going to address the fear and mistrust that not only reflects a perceived lack of competency with biological materials due to my being a female textile artist, but also how it acts to dictate the form my work must take in display contexts. In the Biomateria exhibition, I exemplified the extra labor and trust required of the bioartist to not only work with fairly innocuous materials, but also to display them publicly. I was required to display a Biosafety Level 2 biohazard permit that had been authorized to me and established me as the principal investigator of the black box. Additionally, I was tasked with keeping all of my various biosafety certifications on site, representing several extra hours of training in the proper handling of live materials. And not only did these certificates have to be present, but so too did the certificates of lab users, who served as backup if I couldn't be reached in the event of a biohazardous spill. It was more of a threat to my work than it posed to them. I was soon after invited to attend the Public Health Agency of Canada's first Canadian DIY Bio Summit, an initiative to address the wildly growing DIY bio movement and get a handle on unregulated use of biomaterials. This was another opportunity to perform my biohazardous self via the dress, and ironically I was not allowed to showcase any live materials during the DIY Bio Fair. In another gallery context, I was required by the director to procure a certificate of non-pathogenicity. The curator displayed this official letter on the gallery wall, both to provoke and reassure the public. Regardless of this extreme measure, a gallery technician still reported having a physical reaction when unpacking my work, despite its double containment, and stated concern for his physical well-being. Asepsis is as much a cultural belief system as a biological fact. The purity of the lab, its systems of regulation to ensure sterility and containment are based on not only scientific notions, but also wariness towards the forces of nature, an understanding of the natural world based on a lurking background religiosity that sees the body as a site of spiritual contamination. Keeping distance is the sanctioned protocol for working with biological materials through architectural, bodily, and bureaucratic barriers, as well as psychological barriers to the extent of what I call emotional asepsis. Emotional asepsis can lead to sensory handicap, as in a lack of feeling or a lack of empathy for the material. So, I'll play this video while I talk. I've examined and executed biomateria through two distinct but related feminist threads: craft as labor, from the perspective of feminist materialism, and craft as agent, from an anthropological understanding of witchcraft, as a ritualistic interface for manipulating living systems towards the materialization of self-assembling and co-designing subjects. And so within these frameworks, I address empathy as a lab technique, which is a rogue technique within a biotechnological context, and an antidote to emotional asepsis, developed through slow craft and intimacy. So tissue culture work involves regular long-term feeding and maintenance of billions of cells. It's a significant commitment. And in this light, one may question the necessity of using slowly handmade textile scaffolds versus readily available commercial fabrics. Aside from the fact that one can't very easily source hair cloth, which I've used, the engagement with these frameworks for making on the human scale with the life processes of the tissue culture on the microscopic scale is meant to serve as a mirror. The decelerated, deliberate action of hand-making tiny objects is crucial to an embodied understanding of the shared task of material learning and building haptic knowledge, a shared experience of physicality and its limitations. Supporting active cell engagement with and within the textile scaffold means working to maintain normal cell function while also influencing cell morphology, that's its shape, and motility, that's its movement, enough to foster the building of fragile tissue layers on the structure. And discovering a successful interaction between mammalian cell type and scaffold material is a form of learning and response conducted through the cell anatomy, through the cell membrane, as well as through the hand of the artist. A material fluency developed through intimate corporeal translation. Natural indicators contained within the protein composition of the fibers can help determine the cellular activity. Other determinants include the tension of the warp in maintaining the spacing of the structure, which is woven to biomimetically resemble organic matrices of internal scaffolding, such as the inside of bones. Also important, I discovered, are the intersection points within the woven structure. They become contact zones for the cells, or what we can perhaps even understand as information axes. The resourcefulness of these non-neuronal cells is displayed in how they anchor near the axes, and from there extend microtubules and actin fibers across the negative space towards each other, communicating chemically and through contact to collectively build multicellular bridges within the woven structure. As these bridges widen, the textile grid becomes the protoskeleton for new tissue formation. And the inkling that these cells might possess some form of intelligence related to knowledge generation and communication can influence how we approach, categorize, and work with them. So it's here that an expanded relationship with microorganisms becomes an important consideration. This is me pointing my iPhone through the microscope lens to show where the tissue layers have begun to form at those axes. This is a scanning electron micrograph that shows blue, which is the cell nuclei, green is the actin fibers, like I mentioned, and red is the microtubules. These cells form collagen, and you can see that the collagen formation very much resembles hand-spun yarn. Technical research and production of biotextiles is already industrialized. It's even by some industry players designated as a craft. The research around its applications is presented within traditional sci-tech and industrial frameworks focused on producing standardized, efficient, and profitable outcomes. Such industrial activities retain a certain cultural remove, impersonal through their proprietary scale of mass production. And in my work, the deliberate juxtaposition of the high-tech with the most basic primitive tool forms and techniques is to point to the technological origins of human ingenuity, but also beyond this to show the biological innateness of our own making processes. Creative iterations of biotextiles simultaneously from outside and subversively from within the biotech research model have been taken up by artists, particularly women artists, whose work references the traditionally feminine domestic labor of textile arts in questioning objective modes and sites of biotech production. The Biomateria project, like some of the biotextile projects before it, is interested in the extended idea of relationship formed via labor between human and non-human, specifically how to personalize and politicize the metaphorically cultural network that is the site of productivity in the materials. And we all know, we all understand, these are the Lowell Mill girls, I think, in Connecticut. Weaving is synonymous with community and its relational aspects, and ideas stemming from Marxism place the value of materials as directly connected to the social aspect of production. How many laborers did it take? How many hours of their labor to produce it? This direct value designation system displaces value as being related to the end use or pleasure its owner gets from it, and instead recognizes the principality of the laborers. Artists have taken up the ideologies of the material turn to not only refer more literally to empathetic relationships with their artistic materials, but also to think politically about the labor of art making and the value of production. And the conflation with feminist materialism comes from not only looking at art and craft production and the cultural worker as marginal, particularly in contrast to the prevailing technological accelerationism, but the relationship of being hands-on with the materials in small scale reflects a similar need for community building and knowledge sharing through creative networks. So a culture of cells is a microecology. It's an environment, a community, a center for knowledge and material production processes, and to consider the agency of a culture of cells within a microecology as a political force in terms of its influence over production, particularly my production, is an informative alignment with a feminist appreciation for the value and power of slow craft and labor that is centered within a bodily framework. Upholding the relevance of labor, the labor of craft as an important reflective aspect of my biotech production is part and parcel with recognizing craft as agent and agency through craft. So now on to the witch in the lab coat, that's me. As a form of feminist deviance from the hierarchies of cultural norms, the witch is the artist, is the disruption of standards of institutionalized control over bodies. She shifts form through the boundaries of categorization, knowing no limits for bodily engagement and refusing containment. The figure of the witch is both a traditional knowledge keeper of life systems and pre-existing grassroots pharmacology, and an embodiment of the uncontrollable natural world. She empathizes with, understands, and is one with the powers of nature, and thus moves them. They become her tools and materials in performing what we might call magic or witchcraft. From an anthropological point of view, magic is an interface methodology between human actors and non-human unseen agents. Principles of contagion predate knowledge specializations such as epidemiology and disease control. Contagion magic, often performed as a textile-based craft, utilizes clothing or hair from a targeted person to persuade the unseen forces of nature towards an outcome of wellness or disease. It's a nascent means of biocultural influence. The figure of the witch might share a lot in common with the mad scientist, where madness is a surrender of the rational self in the realm of the invisible or unexplainable, unprovable other. The witch in the lab coat carries out her work partly through ritualized protocols, which scientific protocols are, very ritualized, partly through empathetic technique via labor, intuition, imagination, and affectation, moving within the fluid space of magic and its subtle potential for materialization. So viewing work in the lab through the lens of witchcraft pokes at already existing ritual performance and magical thinking in scientific practice. The witchcraft framework also acknowledges that as with some of the methodologies, the goals of science, religion, or spirituality mean to do the same thing: explain the forces of life, extend or manipulate life, and negotiate human suffering. Do I have time to play a 3-minute video? 1 minute. Okay. Viewing work, no, okay, I already read that. So, to conclude, if part of the reading of this work is a romanticization of biological process and functional science, I want to ask you what this deliberate romanticization might respond to. Going back to the idea of machines and men, that persistent conflation of gender and techno-ontology that's still apparently the norm, what might feminist materialism, textile methodologies, and witchcraft have to offer the world of biotechnology in terms of democratization? Can empathy be translated effectively to a feminist materialist reading of biotechnology? And what might viewing work with cells in an anthropomorphic way through body politics provide? What insights might we gain with regards to our attitudes towards bodily matter as a creative material, but also towards creative work as having a distinct role to play in a more careful advancement of biotechnology? And I just want to point, just sort of give this a little boost. This is a just released issue of Center for Sustainable Practices in the Arts Quarterly. It's an issue that I guest edited on Material Futures, and it contains about 6 different spotlights on artists working at the edge of technology and materials, textiles. So, thank you.